Hello class 11. Here I am going to start next chapter, Discovering Tut, from your Hornbill English textbook. Let's know about the writer. Anne William, that's her real name. She is the former senior writer for National Geographic magazine and online news, where she had covered the world and all that's in it for almost 3 decades. She had received her graduation in classical and Eastern archaeology from Bryn Mawr College and also pursued MA in West Asian archaeology. The chapter describes the historic archaeological event that took place on January 5, 2005. On this exclusive day, the remains of the King Tut, who was the last heir of ancient Egypt, were brought out of his burial chamber. Around 6 p.m. for about 3 hours, and a CT scan was carried out of his body. As he died in his teens, there were many mysteries and speculation about his life and death. However, his tomb was first discovered in 1922 by the famous British archaeologist Howard Carter, and since then his mummy has been subjected to X-rays and then undergone CT scan. All these investigations have answered a lot of questions and offered new clues on his life and death. Let's explore about the facts of this great king. Discovering Tut The Saga continues. Saga means long story based on some important event. Here in this chapter, you are going to explore about all the scientific researches, findings and scannings which had undergone to throw light about the life and death of the great Egyptian king Tut, who was the last heir of the great Egyptian dynasty. Let's now know about the facts. He was just a teenager when he died, the last heir of a powerful family that had ruled Egypt and its empire for centuries. He was laid to rest, laden with gold and eventually forgotten. Here means successor or a person who has the legal right to receive somebody's money or property. The story begins with a description about the great Egyptian ruler, that is Tutankhamun, who was also known as the King Tut. He was the last successor of his powerful Pharaoh dynasty, which ruled Egypt and its empire for many centuries. He was just a teenager when he died. When he died, he was led on rest by heavily loading the gold ornaments on his tomb and then forgotten over the years. Since the discovery of his tomb in 1922, the modern world has speculated about what happened to him, with murder being the most extreme possibility. Speculated, that means to form opinion without any evidence. But when his tomb was discovered in the year 1922, which made the world raise a great question about what had happened to him and whether he had been murdered, that the people were expecting about the reason of his death. Now, leaving his tomb for the first time in almost 80 years, Tut has undergone a CT scan that offers new clues about his life and death and provides precise data for an accurate forensic reconstruction of the boyish pharaoh. CT means computer tomography. This is a technique for displaying on computer the cross section of the human body using X-ray or ultrasounds. Forensic reconstruction, that means the process of recreating the face of an individual through scientific modes. Pharaoh is the ruler of ancient Egypt. Just leaving his tomb for almost 80 years, his body was taken out in the year 2005 and it had undergone a CT scan which had provided the new clues and information about the life and death of this boyish king. However, his face was recreated with the help of a procedure called forensic reconstruction. The aim was to probe the persisting medical mysteries about this young ruler who died more than 3,300 years ago. An angry wind stirred up ghostly dust devils as King Tut was taken from his resting place in the ancient Egyptian cemetery known as the Valley of the Kings. Dark pallid clouds had scudded across the desert sky all day and now were veiling the stars in casket tray. Stirred, that means moved. Ghostly means eerie or unnatural. Resting place, that means the grave. Cemetery, this is a large burial ground. Dark ballad, that means the dark burst clouds. Scudded across, that means moving quickly. Veiling, that means to cover. Casket is a small ornamental box or chest used for keeping the valuable belongings. Casket grave, that means the grey clouds which appeared like the grey colored casket containing the beautiful stars. So here it is mentioned when the King Tut's body was taken out from his resting place, that means his grave, in the ancient Egyptian cemetery known as the Valley of the Kings. Children, the Valley of the King is the place in the Egypt where all the mummies of the ancient Egyptian civilization were buried. So, when King Tut's body was taken out from this graveyard, a fast, strange, and unnatural wind started now blowing all over there. Even the dark clouds started moving quickly across the desert the whole day long, and later on, they also covered the stars appeared in the sky. It means that these clouds, they have hidden all the stars appeared in the sky. It was 6 p.m. on 5 January 2005. The world's most famous mummy glided head first into a CT scanner brought here to probe the lingering medical mysteries of this little understood young ruler who died more than 3,300 years ago. Glided means move smoothly and slowly. Probe means to search or investigate. Lingering, that means long lasting. So, it was January 5, 2005 at 6 p.m. the King Tut's mummy, which is considered to be the most famous mummy, was placed in the CT scanner to investigate the mystery behind his death. All afternoon, the usual line of tourists from around the world had descended into the cramped rock-cut tomb, some 26 feet underground, to pay their respects. They gazed at the murals on the walls of the burial chamber and peered at Tut's gilded face, the most striking feature of his mummy-shaped outer coffin lid. Cramped here means crowded or uncomfortably small place. Gilded, that means thinly covered with gold. Striking, that means prominent. Murals are the wall paintings. That all afternoon, the tourists from all around the world, they had descended, that means gone down, into the 26 feet deep underground rock-cut tomb to pay respect to this great king. Then many people, they have stepped together into this small space and they looked in admiration at the murals on the walls of the chamber, then peered at the face of the Tut that had been covered with gold. Peered, that means to look closely. So they had looked closely with admiration at the golden face of the King Tut. That is the most prominent feature of his mummy-shaped outer coffin lid. That means after gazing at the wall paintings of the burial chamber, they looked thoroughly at the golden face of the Tut, which had appeared on the coffin lid of his mummy. Some visitors read from guidebooks in a whisper, others stood silently, perhaps pondering Tut's untimely death in his late teens, or wondering with a shiver if the Pharaoh's curse, death, or misfortune falling upon those who disturbed him was really true. Whisper means to speak in a low voice. Ponderings, that means to think deeply. While the visitors, they were reading the guidebooks in a very hushed or silent tone, some were standing silently and wondering about the untimely death of this great king in his teens. That means the curse of the Pharaoh would fall upon them who have tried to disturb the long sleep of this great king. The mummy is in a very bad condition because of what Carter did in the 1920s, said Zahi Hawass, Secretary General, Egypt's Supreme Council of Antiquities, as he leaned over the body for a long first look. Antiquities means the things related to past. When the body was taken out, the Zahi Hawass, the Secretary General of Supreme Council of Antiquities, he leaned his body to have the long look over this mummy. Marked, the mummy was in the bad condition due to what Carter did in the year 1920s. Howard Carter, that is, was a British archaeologist who in 1922 discovered Tut's tomb after years of futile searching. Futile, that means pointless, useless. Its contents, though hastily ransacked in antiquity, were surprisingly complete. Ransack, that means to make search thoroughly but badly. Antiquity, that means things related to past. Howard Carter was the first archaeologist who discovered the King Tut's tomb in the year 1922 after the long, pointless searching of the other mummies. Though he had explored the valuable contents of the Tut's body very hastily, but surprisingly, they were complete. Nothing was lost. They remain the richest royal collection ever found and have become part of the Pharaoh's legend. Stunning artifacts in gold, their eternal brilliance meant to guarantee resurrection caused a sensation at the time of discovery and still get the most attention. But Tut was also buried with everyday things he would want in the afterlife. Board games, a bronze razor, the linen undergarments, cases of food and wine. Stunning means extremely attractive. Artifacts, that means man-made objects of historical and cultural importance. Resurrection, that means a new beginning for something which is old. Sensation, that means excitement. All this dazzling and impressive work of art in gold had caused a sensation then and continue to draw the attention of the people till today. King Tut's body was buried with everyday things too, just like board games, linen undergarments, boxes of food and wine which he would need in the afterlife. They had buried all these things with the hope if their king would come back to life, he could use them. After months of carefully recording the Pharaoh's funerary treasures, Carter began investigating his three nested coffins. Opening the first, he found a shroud adorned with garlands of willow and olive leaves, wild celery, lotus petals, and cornflowers, the faded evidence of a burial in March or April. Funerary treasures. These are the valuable things which are buried with the dead bodies. Three nested coffin. That means the three coffins placed one in another in order of decreasing size. The innermost coffin houses the body of the deceased. That means dead person. Shroud. That is the length of cloth in which the dead person is wrapped. Adorn that means decorated. Garlands of willow, that is a wreath of flowers and leaves. Wild celery, it is a kind of wild plant. Cornflowers, these are the bluish purple flowers of a wild plant. It took long months to record all the richest collection lying with this mummy, but Carter started his investigation from the three-nested coffin in which the mummy was buried. In the first coffin, he found a shroud, that means a piece of cloth decorated with garlands of willow and olive leaves, wild celery, lotus petals, and cornflowers, which all indicated that the burial took place in the month of March or April. When he finally reached the mummy, though he ran into trouble, the ritual resins had hardened, cementing that to the bottom of his solid gold coffin. No amount of legitimate force could move them. Carter wrote later what was to be done. Ritual means religious rites. Resins, that means the sticky substance. Legitimate, that means proper or genuine. When Carter reached the third coffin of the mummy, he ran into the trouble as the ritual resins of funeral had hardened the body. These had cemented Tut's mummy to the bottom of his solid gold coffin. However, it had stuck to the bottom of the coffin, which was made of gold. To justify his part, Carter has written in his record that no amount of actual force could separate the mummy from its base. So he was thinking what to do next. The sun can beat down like a hammer this far south in Egypt, and Carter tried to use it to loosen the resins. For several hours, he set the mummy outside in blazing sunshine that heated it to 149 degrees Fahrenheit. Nothing budged. Blazing means very hot. Burst, that means to shift, to have a slightest movement. Carter tried to loosen the ritual resins by putting the mummy outside in the sun that had heated up to 149 degrees Fahrenheit. For several hours, the mummy was set outside in the blazing sunshine, but nothing moved. He reported with scientific detachment that the consolidated material had to be chiseled away from beneath the limbs and trunk before it was possible to raise the king's remains. Detachment means note. Chiseled away, that means to cut something with a chisel. Carter has written in his scientific note that the tough material had to be cut from under the limbs and trunks to free the king's remains. That means he wanted to say that he had only way to chisel the lower part. Means they had only one possible way to separate his body from the coffin, that was to use the chisel and cut down the lower part. So this was the single way left for the Carter to take out the body.